darling. Oh, darling. Oh, well.
Oh, I remember it. It came on, it started when I was in junior high school. And I remember coming home after school and turning on television and watching this.
Those were the good old days.
This was the age of American graffiti. This was the age of innocence.
Well, 6 months later, Dick Clark comes on with American Bandstand, and they're not dancing right at all.
It was where you saw who was really in. It was where you saw the latest dancing styles.
The kids there thought we were celebrities, and they just lined up and would wave and ask for our autographs and everything.
Well, it was what you tried to imitate. You tried to be as cool as people could be on the show. This was the end thing.
Hi-ho, Steve-O. Hi-ho, Steve-O.
I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, and I had a job at the local radio station, KNBY, the voice of the White River Valley, in Newport, Arkansas. And there was a rock and roll group called Sonny Burgess and the Pacers, and they would travel around, and I would travel with them as a disc jockey. And once they said, we're going down to be on a television station in Little Rock. And so I said, gee, how exciting, can I go with you? And so they had just purchased an old hearse as their touring van, and they stopped from Newport to Little Rock, which is about 100 miles, about 6 or 7 times for refreshments. So by the time they got to the television studio, they were ready to rock and roll. And so while they were doing that, I was strolling around the station, and I saw a door that said Program Manager, and it was ajar, and so I looked in, and there was a fellow named Jack Bomar, who went on to play an important part in my life. And I said, in my infinite smoothness, I said, you don't need any announcers, do you? And he said, as a matter of fact, we do, because a fellow left last week. So I said, well, I really would like to get in television. He said, well, send me a tape. Pay at that time was modest, because radio announcers were very eager to segue into television. So if I didn't like the salary I was making, there were probably 10 fellows standing in the wing that would have done it for free, because it was such a wonderful innovation at that time. After a short while, Jack Bomar called me in his office. He said, what do you think about doing a dance party? I said, great. What is a dance party? And he said, well, you know, kids will dance and you'll play records. I said, I can do that.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
At the time, it was black and white television, and there wasn't a lot of precedent to go by. And it was kind of a heady feeling being able to create or invent something. So we invented this dance party. Like most things you do, you overdo it, you overproduce, you over-orchestrate, which we did. For instance, saying that the kids had to wear a coat and a tie. The first show I had, nobody showed up. There I was. I had a dance party, ready to go, ready to rock and roll, and no dancers. So I started, I was wit's end. They said, Steve, stand by, you're going on. I thought, what am I going to do? There's no dancers here. So I said, tell you what, television is new, you haven't seen it, much of you, so I'm going to take you a tour of the studio and also introduce you to the cameramen. So I ad-libbed that and went on, and as time went on, kids had been watching at home and became intrigued with it, and they came down, were looking in the glass door to the studio, and this and that and so forth. And so when we played a record, I said to the fella outside, I said, let them in, like animals. I said, let them in. And so they said, is it okay? All we got on is jeans and T-shirts and so forth. I said, fine, you're great. So they came on, and that was the end of the dress code. It became so popular the management said, let's extend it throughout the week to see if it'll go. Well, it was tremendously popular because rather than just having a Saturday event, every afternoon after school, the kids, after they got out of school, they would jump in the car and head down to Steve's show where they would mix and mingle.
And I'd get home in the afternoon from school and catch a bus if we didn't have a car. And my schoolwork really suffered because I couldn't wait to get home and get down there. And we just had a lot of fun. And the boys, that's where we wanted to meet all the boys dancing.
Of course, one of the main reasons that guys like to go down to Steve's show was to meet girls.
Many of us had favorites, and a lot of us had crushes on a lot of the guys that were there, so I probably won't name any of those people.
There was a couple.
Boys found that, like myself, that it's great. It was cool to dance, and because you'd see jocks like Nick Avant, and on there dancing, and he said, well, it's all right to dance. And he found out the girls liked you to dance.
We would go to Steve's show every day after school. We would actually walk from Central to the Channel 11 studios and go down there and dance, and we would go on Saturdays, and dancing became just part of our lives.
It was wonderful. We'd dance at Steve's show, then we'd go to the Optimist Club on Saturday night, then we'd go to Lake Nixon on Sunday.
We went out to Lake Nixon. There was a pavilion there with a jukebox, and we would dance out there and had a good time. And then Saturday nights we'd all congregate at the Rosedale Optimist Club.
It kept us out of trouble, and it was a good way to meet girls, so that's what we did.
Not only could I could dance fairly well, but when I started high school, wow, the girls liked it.
Hi-ho, Steve-O.
I would open the show with any number of different songs until I heard a comedian who was on the Steve Allen show record a song called Hi-Ho, Steve-O. And it was just a natural for us. So we used that as our theme song. And when I would see people, even today, people think it's very clever to say, Hi-Ho, Steve-O. So that's how it started. And sometimes it was just serendipity that made things happen. Some viewer sent us in a pennant from their high school, and I put it up. And then somebody else sent one, and we began to think, this is a pretty good idea for a backdrop. So we created just a backdrop and began to put these pennants from the various high schools on there, and that became our permanent backdrop with a round sign in the middle that said Steve Show, which was also designed by a viewer and sent to us. Had glitter all around it and said Steve Show on it. Just really amazing how the show became sort of a cooperative from the viewers and everybody else. But that's how the set developed. We were inventing it as we went along. As I thought of an idea, or the dancers would say, Steve, why don't you try this or that? Or we would watch as the dancers developed. We would think there might be a way of enhancing them on what's going on. Some of the dancers actually told me that they watched the show and saw how good the dancers were, wanted to be on, but felt they weren't good enough, so they'd practice with a doorknob or with a chair or with a partner until they felt good enough to come down and go on the show.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight.
What was interesting is we had a lot of dancers from throughout the state. As a matter of fact, buses would roll up out front, and entire schools would come and unload in front of the studios, and they would call ahead, and we would reserve spaces for 25 or 30 or what have you.
One of the things I noticed when I went down to Steve's show and started going regularly was all of the different areas that were represented there. You know, we were sort of the, quote, city folks, and then there were people from the outlying areas, some of the more rural areas, and so it was really fun and interesting to interact, all of us together, and meet people that otherwise we wouldn't have gotten to meet.
The show was a great equalizer. There were no cliques on the show, regardless of what status the dancers happened to have. they all were equal, and they met new friends, and it was sort of like a fraternity of dancers, and it was quite interesting to see.
We were 9 miles from Carlisle, big rivals. You didn't go over to Carlisle unless you want to get in a fight. When Steve's show came along, they went to Steve's show. We went to Steve's show, and that senior year, we went to Carlisle for dances, and they'd come to Lonoke. It was amazing. I think the show, the dancing, the rock and roll brought a lot of people together in a unique way.
The one thing that I do remember about Steve's show so fondly was the wholesome attitude of everyone that was there. There was not any bad type of activity going on in the background. What you saw on camera was strictly what was happening there.
Our parents did not have to be worried.
Well, actually, it was a happy time because it was between two wars, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. It was a very peaceful time, and people were happy. It was sort of an Ozzie and Harriet time.
The kids that I met there at Steve's show are my friends today.
Where are you, little star? Where are you? Oh, rat-a-tat-tat-too. Oh, rat-a-tat-tat-too. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are. Wish I may, wish I might.
You know, one of the biggest thrills of my early childhood was dancing on Steve's show. I still remember when I went, how old I was, that a group of us from Hot Springs went over. I still remember the girl I danced with. And I still remember being very grateful that she was a much better dancer than I was.
When I got into the 8th grade, my friend Pat Hurst and I went with her sister, her older sister Mary. Mary, as a matter of fact, auditioned my dancing ability before she asked me if I wanted to go down there, because if you couldn't dance, you didn't have any business going down to Steve's show. That's what it was all about.
There was a regular group of dancers who came down who were very good and were always developing new styles. And they became known as Steverinos because they were the nucleus of the dancers who were always there. And they became celebrities.
I think I only went once. I seem to remember there was some kind of a party and there was a group of us that went down there in the afternoon. But I remember being very shy about this. This was embarrassing. The people who were on it regularly were good. They were really good dancers. I never considered myself one of them.
There were times that we would be coming down from the conference room to go into the studio, which was at the end of a long hall and down some steps and through a small door. And the people would just be absolutely crowded down those hallways. And it was really kind of embarrassing in a way, but very thrilling in another, because a whole bunch of us would come trooping down the steps and walk down the hall like we really thought we were something, and we really did think we were something. And go into the studio first, and then all the other people would be let in, where they would stand around the edges of the dance floor and watch us dance. And they would dance too, but generally they just stood and watched a lot.
I soon realized that I wasn't the star of the show. The star of the show were all the dancers, and they began to get fan letters.
I know that I got over 100 fan letters, and even at one point in time, I would have loved to have had them, but my ex-wife got real jealous about the fan letters at some point in time and burned them all, so I didn't have those anyway.
I would get a few letters from girls who didn't like the fact that I always would dance with a particular boy. It's like when we would watch a TV show and form a crush on someone we never knew, they would do the same thing with the boys on our show.
That was a really fun thing, and people were always, you know, did I get mail, did I get mail?
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting to me was to get a little bit of a taste of what it was like to be a celebrity, and like I said, it was just a little taste. We went on a work trip down to Lonoke, and I ended up sitting on the hood of the car while my dad finished the job, and it was right around the corner from the main drag where the cars, like with girls, would be driving, and they ended up, I guess, noticing me, and started by the end of the day, there were 10 or 12 cars in a row coming around real slow with the girls flirting and whatever. It was quite a little ego trip for a 15 or 16-year-old.
It's amazing to me how people remember Steve's show. It's been so long now since we were on television. I had a doctor's appointment one day, and I noticed the nurse just kept looking at me, kind of studying me, and I was a little bit uncomfortable. I didn't know why she was looking at me so intently, till finally, as I was just about to leave the doctor's office, she said, "That's where I know you from. You used to dance on Steve's show." And it had been 40 years since I had been on Steve's show. I was just amazed. She said, "I watched every day."
Everywhere we travel throughout the nation, including the Cayman Islands and Mexico, we see somebody in an airport, somebody on the street who come up to Steve and say, "Hello, Steve. I was one of your Steverinos." And he's always so gracious with them.
Well, the opportunity to be on Steve's show, I think, was multifaceted. It brought a level of maturity for us. It gave us a great place to express ourselves, but it was also a very wholesome place. It had tremendous energy because of its leader, Steve Stevens, and we learned a lot from him. He ended up not only being very supportive and encouraging to us as we were going through those very sensitive years of wanting to express ourselves, but he also became a mentor to many of us, hundreds of us, as a matter of fact, later.
I got to know many of the dancers quite well because they were regulars. Some of their, and I watched with interest their romances and watched how they developed with their poise. It's quite interesting that many of the dancers came down there a little shy and reticent, and then another dancer would ask them to dance, and they gradually came out of their shell, and as they became more popular and received fan mail, it made them realize they had an identity of their own. They were important individuals, and they got to be stars of the show. We started out without any sponsors, and as we began to get more viewers, then the salesmen of the station became interested in the show, and they began to sell commercials in it.
People would rush home in the afternoon to watch the afternoon shows, and then on Saturdays people would come down in droves, and they had a big area up above the dance floor that was glassed off that would just be full of people up there on Saturday watching the show from upstairs.
As the popularity of the show grew, so did our commercials, and the station liked that very much. Actually, they had a wonderful product in what we had, even without me, because the cast of the show was free. All the dancers, all of the prizes we gave away were free because of the sponsors. And the records were sent to me by recording companies from all over. They were free. So we had a pretty free environment in which to operate the show. And that's another reason that it became a success, because we had very low production cost. It never occurred to me at the time, but I had an open door policy. I had an office. I had where I played the records. And the kids would just come in and go out. They didn't bother me.
We felt very welcome to go in. We would sit in the chairs, and sometimes he would come in and look for a place to sit. He usually wouldn't find one. He would let us go through the records, pick the ones we wanted to hear.
And the music at that time was just great. It was really in the beginning of rock and roll, and it was just so exciting to be a kid at that time.
It was actually phenomenal. I can't tell you how many records I would get every day from a multitude of recording companies, because at that time everybody wanted a hit and you could record a record fairly inexpensively. So I got just tons of records, and I could play them 10 or 15 seconds and tell you whether it was going to be a hit, or the kids who'd be standing around in the office visiting and so forth, they'd say, "Hey, boy, that's a good one, Steve. I love the beat." And so that's how we used the records. The dancers had the run of the television station, as a matter of fact, which was kind of unheard of nowadays with security measures being what they are, but they were extremely well behaved. And as time went on, we felt like that I might need a hostess. And so there was an attractive, very outgoing little gal named Ethelina Holder. And so she seemed to know everybody on the show, and we said, you want to help me with the various aspects of the show, such as giving out records and presenting the Coke and the cake and all of the prizes we give away. And so Ethelina helped us out there just sort of in a casual way until she started dating a young fella who suggested it might be good if she didn't come to the show again because he might lose her, and he later went on to marry her. So from that, we felt like we might need permanent hostesses. So we conducted a contest in which we asked the viewers to vote on who would be the best hostesses to help Steve. And we had some preliminary requirements, but the voters all voted for two entirely different kind of personalities. Mary Ellen Ruth, who was the all-American, blonde, outgoing, wonderfully naive and a perfect little gal. To the contrast was another gal named Tanya Lay, who was a brunette, who was a little more sophisticated, and they contrasted each other very well. They won the contest, and they had in the beginning, they even had uniforms that matched, like little hostesses.
When they chose the hostess, they gave us roses, and they drove this blue convertible out. Well, Gene,
and I thought she won the car.
he was so excited he was going to drive it, and Paul Thomas says, no, you're not going to drive it. He drove it. But they took us to dinner that night to the Embers. That was the nicest restaurant, or maybe one of the nicest back in those days. And we went to a show, South Pacific, the opening, and there was this long line of people waiting to get in the showing, and they drove us up front, and they had the cameras and lights going, and we were ushered in to the movies in front of everybody else, got this treatment that was really kind of neat. I'd never experienced anything like that before.
It worked out fine, and they enjoyed themselves very much. They were a tremendous help, and they became extremely popular. We were always trying to keep the show fresh, and after selecting the hostesses, we thought it might be a good idea to have some models to actually model clothes from a local clothier.
I was one of the original models. There was a woman named Evelyn Ellman. She worked for Channel 11. She taught us how to do our makeup, and we had such a great time, and we wore these wonderful clothes.
We just look over the dance floor and say, you're cute. Hey, you want to be a model? And say, yes. It's okay. You're it. You're one. And so we had about 11 young gals there who were all very attractive. It got to be quite an honor to be known as a model.
We modeled every Saturday. And on Thursday of every week, we would go down to Tommy's clothing store, which was the clothes that we wore every week. And Tommy would personally help select the clothes that we wore.
The styles that the models wore were really quite current and very upscale. As a matter of fact, more upscale than they would normally wear. And that's one of the reasons the models enjoyed modeling, because it was a sort of a mini fantasy trip. And they would go down to the store and try on the clothes and be fitted for them.
But everyone pushed and shoved, and everybody wanted the mirror. There was only one mirror. And oddly enough, we ended up playing well together because everyone had to help each other. And everyone took their turns getting in there and helping each other get dressed and deciding how did she get that outfit instead of me. But we ended up buying most of the clothes. And we became like the dancers, people that receive fan mail. And I guess we didn't expect that. We understood very clearly that we were not to dance until after we did our modeling. And then after the modeling was over, yay, we could dance. And we did.
There were all kinds of different little contests. We had a Holy Gully contest. I guess that's the very first line dance.
Frankie and Annette Funicello were just on the big screen all the time, And I think Frankie Avalon had planned to visit Steve's show, and there was a big promotion that was going on. A lot of my friends who said, you know, Marianne, you look a lot like Annette Funicello. And they're asking people to send in photographs of themselves for an Annette Funicello lookalike contest. That this was the picture that I sent in to Steve's show for the Annette Funicello lookalike contest.
One of the events was we had a contest in which we were going to award a date with the singer Tommy Sands, who was coming to Little Rock for the Arkansas Livestock Exposition. So we had viewers from all over the state write letters as to why they would like to have a date with Tommy Sands. And so this one letter came in. It was just so perfect. Her name was Betty Faye Douglas, and she won the date with Tommy Sands. And so the date Tommy was there, she had been told she had won, and everybody knew that, and she was very anxious, said he was to meet her on the television show. And so I walked up to her and I said, well, I'm really sorry, but Tommy couldn't make it. The date's off. He's not going to be here. And the camera zoomed in on her face, and she was kind of crestfallen, and she said, well, that's all right. And about that time, he burst through the curtains, and there he was. The crowd went wild, and she loved it.
I remember the freeze dance that we used to do, where you'd be dancing along and the music would stop, and whatever position you were in at the time the music stopped, you instantly had to hold that position.
We had sort of like dance-offs, and basically what I remember most about it was Tommy and Connie music usually won because they were so good, and they were just fun to watch.
One of my favorite ones was the cake dance that they usually had on Saturday, and you would win usually a coconut cake from Myers Bakery, I believe, or Colonial Bakery. And we would share that cake. Whoever won it would open it up, and we would just get in there and get it, and there would be cake all over the studio, all over us. No one ever fussed at us. We cleaned up a little bit after. But you also would win the small little Cokes.
My dance partner, Sandy Hubbard, and I used to work real hard. We practiced at her mom and dad's house, cleaned a whole room out so we could practice for hours, which we ended up winning King and Queen of Dance. I think we won a carton of Coke.
The Follow the Leader dance was a lot of fun.
We'd line up, boys on one side, girls on the other, and the first couple who were the leaders would perform a certain turn or something like our move, and so each couple down the row would have to repeat that.
I remember Johnny Thomas was generally the leader. He was really a good spinner. So he would try his best to mess everybody else up by doing a real complicated spin, and it got to be a lot of fun, and by the time it got to the end of the line, it was pretty much destroyed and we had to begin again.
We gave away a variety of prizes which were all free, such as we got free cakes, free flowers, free Cokes, and that's the way we rewarded the kids, and they thought it was fun. And at that time there was a song called Bermuda Hop, and so I came up with the idea of why don't we have a Bermuda hop and let's have it outside the studio. Well, the engineers were really upset about this because that meant they had to string cable and put the cameras outside in the parking lot to do all this, because we had no such thing as a remote telecast at that time. But we did it, and it was hugely successful. That was our first and only so-called remote. The studio in which we had the show had a turntable which was designed to show automobiles, and we came up with the idea of moving the turntable but having a spotlight in one spot, and as the dancers danced they actually moved into the spotlight, and temporarily they were in the spotlight while they danced. Once I was doing a commercial and my mic cord got caught in the turntable, and as I was doing the commercial I was going out of the picture. Those were the good old days. Well, as the show became more popular and more kids came down to the show, we realized we were having rather large crowds there, to say the least. It was filling up the entire studio until the fire department, the fire marshal, actually came to us and said, we've been watching this show on television. You've got far too many people in here to be safe, so you're going to have to restrict it to a certain number of people. I can't remember how many now. And so that led us to issuing tickets, first come, first served, to those who wanted to come to the show.
It was almost impossible to get on the show. So we concocted a little scheme to get on, because we had to order tickets, which were not, they didn't charge for tickets, but just to limit it, because people were arriving by busloads to go to Steve's show. There was a couple from Lone Oak that had tickets. We took them to the school mimeograph machine and made copies. So my brother and I and our dates went with them. We got in there and it was packed, and they said, there's too many people in here. So they were going to check tickets. Scared us to death. It was so packed with other people who had done the same thing we had done. And then they came just checking tickets because we could barely dance in there. And they started shoveling people out, and we kept scooting to the back. And we managed to stay, and we were just elated, you know, to be on there. And you go back home and say, hey, I saw you on Steve's show. Yeah, big deal.
I wonder, who wrote the book of love? Tell me.
There were several romances that actually developed on the show. One I remember especially, Mary Ellen Ruth and Jean Ballman. They were just devoted to each other, danced together beautifully all the time. And so toward about the time they were to graduate, he proposed to her, asked her to marry him. And they told me about it. I said, gee, that's just really great. I've got a great idea. Why don't you get married on the show, and we'll take care of everything. The show will pay for everything. And so they didn't do it, and each of them claims that the other didn't want to do it. But I still think it would have been a great idea.
We didn't want to do that. That just didn't seem to be
She didn't
very...
want to do that.
You wanted to do it, huh?
I would have done it, yeah.
I wouldn't do that.
When it was announced on the show, we got presents, lots of things people sent us, and congratulations.
Yeah.
41 years later, I guess it was okay.
After we'd done the show for a while, about 6 months as a matter of fact, Jack Bomar called me into his office. He said, I want to show you something, black and white television. He turned on the television, and there were a bunch of dancers. I said, what is that? He said, that's called American Bandstand, and it's coming from Philadelphia. And he said, but you're better. And I said, yeah, but they've got a network behind them, and all we have is a small station here in Arkansas. But so he came on about nationally about 6 months after we were on. That was my first notion that this concept might last a while.
We looked a little bit like American Bandstand as far as the type of show and all, but I always remember that we danced differently, quite a bit differently, and I always thought a whole lot better than they did.
The Steve show was so much better than the Dick Clark show. And also the dancers were better on Steve's show than on Dick Clark's show.
We watched American Bandstand some, but not the way they danced. We liked the way they danced here in Arkansas. Arkansas Push is what we called it.
You're 1,000 miles away, but I still have your love.
From time to time, some of the dancers would tell me of someone who had talent, and I'd say, well, tell them to call me. One group was called the Singing Martin Sisters, and they were 3 gals who had perfect harmony.
Sincerely, oh, you know how I love you.
They're from some small town in Arkansas, and they would actually drive in for the show, and they were a huge hit. And they would go with the Steverinos when we would make personal appearances around the state, and but they were very popular.
We ended up singing down there at least once a week, one summer, I remember.
Another fellow named Bobby Chandler, who had a marvelous voice, and he had a recording contract. And then there was Sonny Burgess and the Pacers, whom who have always been a very special part of my life. About the time Steve Show was going on, a fellow named Wink Martindale, who went on to achieve some pretty good success on network television, had a show over on the ABC affiliate in Memphis. He would book quite a few rock and roll acts in because Memphis was twice the size of Little Rock, and I tried to work a deal with him so that when the entertainers were on his show, they would come on over to Little Rock, because Little Rock was not a destination for most rock and roll singers, but we got quite a few. I came up with the idea of calling a man named Dane Harris, who owned the Vapors, which was a nightclub in Hot Springs, because he was beginning to book in huge artists, and I asked him, I said, I got a deal for you. If you will write into their contracts that they will make one non-performing appearance on my show, I will publicize your place. And he said, sound like a deal for me. So he wrote into their contract that in addition to performing 2 times a night at the Vapors, they would be driven over Little Rock and be on my show. So it worked out, gave us tremendous ratings and helped him too.
Tanya and Steve and the crew and I went to Hot Springs and interviewed Mitzi Gaynor, and she was just perfect. And she had false eyelashes. I'd never seen false eyelashes before. Her makeup was perfect, her hair was perfect, and she was, you know, so friendly and nice, and she liked my shoes.
Some of the dancers graduated from being dancers to members of the production crew. For instance, Gene Ballman and Bob Lawrence both went on to become cameramen.
We had 2 studios next to each other with a small door between them. And one had the news set up in it, and the other had the weather set up in it. And so one night we had only one camera, and I was operating it. Normally we'd have a guy on the floor that would pull the cable to keep it out of the way of the tripod wheels on the camera. We didn't have it this night, so I was trying to kick the cable out of the way and had to go to the other studio while they went to black between shots, and had to run the camera through that doorway and set up on the weather shot. Well, as I swung the camera around, the cable had not moved. 2 wheels of the tripod hit at the same time, and of course the weight, the center of gravity was high, and it just went right over and smashed into the concrete floor of the studio. So I was known at the station for that for a long time.
Bob Lawrence, after being a cameraman for a while, joined the Navy, became a Navy fighter pilot, made 365 landings aboard a carrier. I asked him, was he ever scared? He said, every single time. Many of the dancers have told me they felt inspired to do other things. One example was Bob Franken, who went on to become a major newscaster with CNN. And he claims that being on the show and dancing on Steve's show gave him the desire to go into television.
Well, I guess it's fair to say that there is a direct line between the Steve Show and black and white and this and living color. That was sort of my first experience on television, and perhaps my most productive. The fact of the matter is that what the Steve Show did was A, to keep me off the streets, and B, introduce me to something that really became something I believed in. It was a passion, and it started there. And for that, Steve, the entire world can probably blame you. But it was something very important to me as a child and something that stayed with me through my adulthood.
Steve was voted by the teenagers in Arkansas from 1957 to 1961 as their #1 TV personality, easily. And he missed by 1 vote one of those years in being the tops in the nation, which is amazing when you consider there was Dick Clark too.
Just recently it was announced that Steve has been chosen to be inducted into the Arkansas Entertainers Hall of Fame, and we think it's just about time.
Steve Stevens was sort of the dominant cultural figure of my childhood and the coming of age of rock and roll. I was glad to get to know him later, and horrified when I saw him once in Washington when I was president, and he still looked much younger than I did.
The show started in 1957 and went continually until I left to become a media consultant with Senator McClellan in Washington in 1965. And remarkably, the reason that I was offered that position was because Senator McClellan had noted the advent of television and knew how important it was going to be in politics. And he wanted me to teach him how to use the new medium of television. And so Steve's show opened that door for me, as it opened the door for me in many, many things that have happened in my life.
Oh, my love, my darling, I've hungered for.
You know, it's interesting that occasionally I'm asked, could someone see a videotape of the show? Well, the time we were on, there was no such thing as a videotape. And so consequently, there is no record of the show, except in a few instances, some people took pictures of the television set, which I think were called kinescopes. And then I think there's a little bit of film taken in the studio. But it's too bad there's no... When videotape then came on, I think toward the last, Steve's show was taped, but the station, in an effort to conserve cost, taped over it. So that's where it is. I had heard of Steve's show reunion and had always been busy doing other things and never participated in it until I was invited to one of the reunions and was really delighted with the whole experience, and really somewhat surprised that the dancers on that show still fondly remembered the times that they had.
And then I just started writing people's names down, and Mary Ellen's pretty good with the computer, and she started, you know, putting it in the computer, and now we've got it to where we've got everybody that comes in the computer once a year, and we always have a nice turnout. We have 100+ people. Everybody acts like they're glad to see each other. I've told that it was kind of like a family reunion, except everybody liked each other. So
we still have a freeze dance and follow the leader dance, and Johnny Thomas still starts that. But people are really good dancers. It's like riding a bicycle, I guess you don't forget. When we have the reunions, it's amazing to me how everybody dances the whole time. You know, the music starts playing, and people, you know, just seem to dance all evening. Of course, there seems like there are times when we like to visit a lot, but
I think it's neat that everybody seems to get back and look like they did. I mean, they look just like they did when they were dancing on the show or at the lake or whatever.
But I'm not surprised that many of the dancers are still as good, if not a little bit better. And they don't move quite as fast, but they still move. They've got all the rhythm, you know. The Steve Show reunions have continued, and I've gone to a couple of them, and everybody continues to have great fun. And it's good to see the looks in their eyes as they fondly remember each person and what happened at that particular time.
And one night every year, we're 16 years old, I think.
Don't know much about history.
Is that the real Johnny Thomas?
Dance has stayed with me all my life. I have a dance studio now.
If I can still remember how to do this. KTHV, Channel 11, Little Rock.
I would get on this doorknob and I would watch TV, and I remember Don Fallis. Does anybody remember Don Fallis? This guy had such step, and I said, that's the guy I want to dance like right there. So I went about the motions, and one day I thought to myself, hey, I think I can do that now. So I took a little trip over to KTHV. And as I walked in there, I looked, and it was like being in a fairy tale land. All these people that I had been watching in black and white, here they were in color. Connie Music asked me to dance. And I thought, boy, this was a privilege for me, because here's a guy that was watching all this in black and white, and all of a sudden one of the most popular girls on Steve's show was asking me to dance. And I was able to get through that dance. And after that, it was just like, here I am, I'm one of the regular guys. It's just real hard to imagine somebody from living out in Rose City that could actually be a part of this great show that they had over there. But Steve, I want to thank you and all the others that had anything to do with Steve's show as a milestone in my life, and it was something that I'll always cherish for the rest of my life.
People still remember that show, and I think they always will, and they remember it fondly.
You know, after all is said and done, in looking back over the years, it's really quite remarkable that people have such fond memories of that show called Steve's Show.
I'm grateful for what he did for all of us when I was young, and I'm glad to have been his friend.
Of course, Steve Stevens had the ability to make what isn't easy look easy, and that's the toughest thing you can do in this business. It's extremely difficult, but it's not supposed to look like it is.
You know, Steve, you've been a real leader for the youth of Arkansas for a long time, and for the adults. Thanks for all you've done for our state.
At the time, I was just doing what I thought was a job. The dancers were just frivolously doing what they thought was fun. And then when we look back on it, we realized we were creating a little history of our own. And it's really quite interesting. The thought that the dancers on that show still have fond memories of all the good times they had makes me feel good. It also makes me happy to know that when Steve's show is mentioned, it brings a smile to most people's faces. And that makes me happy.
In our teenage years, the things that happened to us stay with us. It's such a strong memory. Steve was doing his job, and I'm sure he enjoyed it. I think he enjoyed us. We had a lot of fun together.
Being on Steve's show gave you a lot of self-confidence, and who knows how different your life would have been had you not been there. And Steve was such a role model and all. Steve, we love you.
It's everything in my teenage life at that time.
But he has no idea at all of the effect he's had on all of us.
After all these years, especially doing something like this right now, it's joyous to know that it has had that kind of a memory.
Sophocles once said 2,000 years ago that sometimes one must wait until the evening to see how beautiful the day has been. And it has been a beautiful day.
They ever flood my soul. In the stillness